received a really neat email from Derek a while back that I actually had in the background ready to show. However, wanting to get the meeting restarted and get on with things, I did not go fetch it back up out of the emails. But basically, it was something that he'd written that reminded him of our mutual journey, and to the effect that the path of Tao cultivation actually had turned out for so many of us to be a path of wish fulfillment. Hopefully, you won't mind if I talk a bit about your personal writing to me there. He talked about how his wish had always been to be a published author and to be able to spread the Tao teachings far and wide, and how Janice had always wanted to bring higher awareness of the Tao to the West, and to help to spread the authentic and real teachings over here, and how so many of us that had been on the path together had realized the desires of our hearts, our wishes, as we'd gone down the path. And he asked me if I kind of felt that way myself, and absolutely I do. Once again, cultivating the Tao teachings doesn't by any stretch of the imagination guarantee us a life free from problems and challenges and difficulties, but that's never was the point. What it does, though, is that it allows what I call a near miraculous process to go to work in our lives that helps us to bring about the things that we deeply desire, the things that we really want to accomplish. In my case, ever since I discovered that there was an I-kuan Tao, that there was an organized group of people that had access to the genuine and authentic teachings, have wanted to help to foster and nurture and spread those teachings as well. I've believed for most all of my life that there had to be a better or different or alternative set of answers to the deep life questions that all of us have. I've always known in my heart that they were there, and at least for me personally, having access to the authentic teachings of the Tao has provided an awful lot of those answers. That's not to say that it's going to provide the answers for absolutely everyone. Everyone has their own sets of questions and their own sets of beliefs and values, and those are all perfectly valid as well. But for me, this was a journey in coming home and trying to help others to find the same answers that I did. So yeah, Derek, it is amazingly true, and gets more and more true as the years go by. Last week we started talking about the Happy Meal culture, and the culture of instant gratification, of meism, the now generation, if you will. The remarkable propensity for our society to believe that individually none of us can do anything wrong, that we are all entitled to whatever we want, whenever we want it, however we want it, and the effects that has on us. It's never been a tenet of the Tao teachings that instant gratification and instantaneous desire and wish fulfillment would be part of living. The Tao teachings is all about a lifelong, sustained journey of learning and growing in wisdom and virtuous living and refinement and self-improvement over time. There's just not a way in the world that any of us can know early on in our path of Tao studies what we're going to become, because we lack the knowledge and wisdom to even ask the right questions then. But as we go down the path, as we mature, as we grow, we start to find out what it is we didn't know. We start to learn what we didn't know. And we discover that way back when we started, we had no idea what we didn't know. and then we start asking better questions and getting more and more refined as the years go by. And we begin to discover the true nature of ourselves and how things ought to work. And so where I kind of left off last week was in saying that the Happy Meal culture in our society is not a new thing, and it's not. In one form or another since ancient times. People have decried the condition of their societies and the impetuousness of youth and the things that men do to other men, and that's the literary mankind and not the specific gender. We've, for as long as there have been people, have had various conflicts and contentions and strife and wars and all kinds of other societal problems. None of those things are new. But here in the West in particular, where we've not always had access to these teachings, there's always been a dearth, if you will, of good and appropriate information, short of a couple of specific traditions and a whole lot of extremist thinking to deal with that culture. All over the world, societies have dealt with the Happy Meal culture in one way or another. Most people do it simply by growing up. I remember when I was a kid, for me in the 60s and early 70s, not being part of the establishment was a big deal. Everything was groovy and far out and right on and okay. The buzzword language of the time has kind of stuck with me, even though the time is long since gone. and that happens generation after generation. And sometimes by the process of simply maturing, of learning that life isn't the dream we thought it was going to be when we were kids, we kind of approach a deeper sense of what life's all about simply by acquiring that life experience. Pardon. But that doesn't really give us a good window into our spiritual selves or into our motivations, why we do things and how we do things. Okay? Why it is we desire certain things and why it is we eschew certain others. And so supplanting the Happy Meal culture to a more refined societal and spiritual path isn't a new thing either. People have asked those questions and sought those answers for as long as there have been people. But learning to ask those questions, learning to give up emotional attachments and desires, learning to turn loose of outdated or antiquated or dysfunctional thinking, is all part of beginning to mature on that Tao path. Whether or not one might have known their path was specifically a Tao-oriented path or not, I'm not quite sure is relevant. But there have always been those throughout time who appeared to be a little more enlightened than the rest of us, and those were the folks for whom this path had answers. With the advent of the Tao teachings in the West, what the rest of us have gained is something that we can identify with that encapsulates those answers. Okay? And no matter what set of traditions or values or philosophies we follow, among the vast majority of the uplifting traditions that are available, knowing oneself is that first step to mastering the self, to submitting the ego to a more rational and reasonable mind, to becoming a more refined, better, and more virtuous individual. Okay? All of those things are essentialities in life if we're going to progress. And, Lao Tzu speaks to those who will and will not progress as well. But that's kind of a whole different talk. I don't think you all wanted to read that. In chapter 33 of the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu says, those who understand others are intelligent. Those who understand themselves are enlightened. Those who overcome others have strength. Those who overcome themselves are powerful. Those who know contentment are wealthy. Those who proceed vigorously have willpower. Those who do not lose their base endure. Those who die but do not perish have longevity. This chapter, perhaps more succinctly and better than any other, kind of sums up what it is to walk that Tao path for the eternity, the duration of one's lifetime. Maybe eternity was a Freudian slip there. I personally happen to believe that may be a journey of lifetimes, but you guys can take that for what you believe. That notwithstanding, this is the basis for all of Tao cultivation and for the vast majority of societal and personal refinement. To understand others without looking deeply within kind of fails us in the areas of refining the behaviors and attachments and desires that cause for us to not be the people we ought to be. It's always been easier to say that everything's someone else's fault, someone else is doing, or not our responsibility. But to adopt that perspective on living gives us a ready-made excuse to not challenge ourselves. Once we turn our gaze inwards and begin to understand our own motivations, our own desires, our own attachments, the things that drive and motivate us, then we begin to really understand how things work. To overcome others, Lao Tzu says, is to have strength. And overcoming others can be done in a variety of ways, many of which don't require any strength at all. We live in a society where beating someone severely with words is done frequently. Go to work in any office building anywhere. Stand around a water cooler for a while. There are always those who are willing to step on the backs of others to make themselves appear better. I don't always understand that, but I've seen it over and over again. To overcome the self, once again, to turn the gaze inward, to look at ourselves, and then to change the behaviors that make us the folks at the water cooler who are stepping on other people, takes real power. It takes enough integrity, willpower, and honesty to say that we ourselves are not the folks we want to be, and that we are going to overcome the habits and behaviors and desires and attachments that keep us from being who we want to be. It says, those who know contentment are wealthy. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with the accumulation of secular wealth. Okay? I tell people that there is no such thing as a Tao of poverty or want. And there isn't. But there is a knowledge of contentment with one's lot in life, generally speaking. There's a wisdom associated with understanding that sometimes we're on the very top of the world and sometimes we're at the very bottom, but most of the time we're somewhere in the middle. Okay? And so contentment is one aspect of living life. And I suppose at one level it's okay, but those who proceed vigorously towards improving the self, those who move towards reducing the desires and attachments and understanding the drives and motivations that make us do what we do, and then turning those drives and motivations to a higher purpose requires the kind of willpower and the kind of strength that only comes from within the true self. Lao Tzu then says in the last two lines that those who do not lose their base endure. To explain that, I think, in terms of a New Testament teaching where Jesus tells his disciples that a house built upon the sand will surely fall. And it will. If you build your house on a beach anywhere, it won't take a week for the tides and the waves to erode the foundation, and the house will absolutely collapse. But a house built upon the rock will stand forever. That base is the foundation of the Tao teachings. No matter, I guess, what tradition one receives them from, the process of refining the self, learning to live that virtuous life, getting rid of the bad habits, picking up some good habits, learning to consider the needs and wants of others, a little compassion, a little sharing, a whole bunch more wisdom, is the base that allows us to endure. And the last line, Lao Tzu says, those who die but do not perish have longevity. Okay, take those two lines together, one with a firm base, a well-constructed house, is someone of substance, somebody who's put together a life worthy of emulating somewhere. Lao Tzu didn't say those who die but do not perish to mean someone who maintains longevity in the body. The human body is surely going to die. It's going to happen for every single one of us. Okay? The one who dies and does not perish is one who leaves a legacy behind them worthy of remembering. In chapter 1 of the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu says that constantly with desires, we see the manifestations of the Tao. Okay? We see the stuff, the creation. We see what we make, what we produce, what we can accumulate and collect. But constantly without desires, we see the essence, the nature of the Tao, the divine, if you will, the creative spark, the moment before conception. And so we can say that as we're learning to walk this Tao path, the ego self, the part we're attempting to supplant to the Tao teachings, covets the desires. It's the ego self that drives us to climb the corporate ladder, to accumulate the most toys before we die, that worries about the stuff we have and the stuff we don't have, that wants what our neighbor has. Okay? It is the true self that fulfills the spirit. And interestingly enough, when we fulfill the needs of the spirit first, the secular success always follows. The ego self serves itself, and it does. It is the ego self that speaks up when one of our children gets punished to say that my child can do no wrong, and you have no right to punish him. When I was in school, the principal of the school could still spank you. And if you got it at school, you were going to get it again when you got home. Now, I'm not sure if that was completely right or not, but we all had a righteous fear of God in us and a righteous fear of the principal. And at some level, I don't think that was bad. These days, if a teacher touches a student, they've got a lawsuit coming. And that says something about our society. It says something about us as people. Okay? That's the ego self. It serves itself. It looks after its own needs. It does not always consider the larger picture or the needs of the whole. The true self, however, lives for the world. The true self understands the bigger picture. The true self understands the needs of the society, of the village, of the town, of the family. The ego self almost always lives in illusion, in the illusions of power and of ownership and of control. And those three things are absolutely illusions. We don't really own anything. We have power over absolutely nothing. And we have control over much less than that. The only thing we have control over is how we will respond when a situation presents itself to us. That's about it. We may force another person to do what we want them to do. We may coerce another person into doing what we want them to do. We may manipulate them. But in the end, those things always cause derision and contention and bad will, and sooner or later somebody figures out you're doing that to them and they get really upset. Those things are absolutely illusions. The true self lives in a clarity of vision that most of us can never approach. I don't claim to have it, certainly not all the time, maybe not most of the time, but I've seen that clarity often enough to know that it exists and that it's vastly different from the view of the world through the eyes of the ego self. It is that clarity of vision that gives us access to real wisdom, real willpower, okay? The bigger picture. So the path to dying without perishing becomes a little simpler, right? The body's going to die one day. It absolutely is. The true self, however, will persist. The true self transcends death. And what we've done and said will last a long time after our physical body dies. It will. Dying without perishing speaks to the persistence of that legacy. How did we live? What did we do? What did we say? Okay? Those folks who hold to the Tao, they're going to be remembered for the way they lived. We talk about the words and teachings of Lao Tzu and Confucius and Mencius and Chuang-Tzu as though they were still here with us. That wisdom has never been lost through the ages. People argue about how old it is, whether or not Lao Tzu ever truly existed, what his name was, and a whole bunch of other things. But the simple fact of the matter is, the existence of that individual and the teachings that he preferred are still being discussed at least 2,000 years, possibly longer, after his physical body went back to the dust from which it came. That's not an unusual set of circumstances. Do I think anybody's going to talk about me 2,000 years from now? I don't know. Probably not. But still, those who hold to the Tao are going to be remembered. What they said, what they did, the things that were worthy of emulation, the examples they set. And I suppose, conversely, those who did not will also be remembered for what they did or did not do. We still remember Adolf Hitler too, but not for the beneficial and compassionate things that he did. The best example I can think of are folks like Master Lin in Taiwan, who was a remarkable gentleman. I had the opportunity to meet him when we were there. Okay, he was a remarkable guy. I'm not sure exactly how old he was when I met him, but he was still spry, mentally agile, very sharp, as down to earth as he could possibly be, and the sweetest guy you ever wanted to meet. Okay, I kind of think about him from time to time, kind of as the example of a sage that I'd like to emulate. Okay, I think of Master William and Master Chen. Once again, down to earth, nicest, sweetest people you ever wanted to meet, full of knowledge and wisdom. And yet there's no arrogance anywhere, no presumption of being better than anyone else. It's a remarkable thing to see and a remarkable thing to emulate. The life of a sage in the Tao is an example to everyone, whether they follow the teachings or not. That example is a venerable example, even for folks who have no spiritual aspirations whatsoever. And to this day, we remember and venerate the sages of ancient times. We do, because those lives were worthy of remembering. That's longevity. Absolutely it is. And during our lifetimes here, we're making the sages for generations to come. The folks today who are cultivating the Tao teachings, the folks who are gaining wisdom and insight and knowledge and refining that to perfection, are creating the sages that are going to be venerated long after I'm gone. And so once again, we can see that all things in life, just like the Tao, are cyclical in nature. We're not going to run out of sages because we're not going to run out of Tao teachings. Because people will always want at some level what is better, what is more virtuous, what is more compassionate in life. Okay? And so we get to wind up here today at the summary again. I truly hope that I was able to, I don't know, say something that was helpful. Mastering the self is the foundation of mastering the Tao. That is an absolute 100% true statement. The Tao teachings are wonderful at a group level, but it is at the individual level, each individual person, that the Tao teachings create their changes and inspire and motivate people to their highest and best selves. Collectively, we can do wonderful things, but it is the individual who takes responsibility for making them happen. The processes of refining the self, of giving up the ego self and leading a virtuous life, those things are the Tao path. Those are the things that when we consider them, when we attempt to grow them, when we nurture them, when we do them, that create the Tao path. Those are the things that lead us to that highest and best self. Those are the things on which we should focus our minds and our hearts. I say that the process appears nearly miraculously. From time to time, Derek says that he sees how much I've changed over the years. To be honest with you, I don't. I guess sometimes you have to look back in hindsight to realize where you've gone. But I really don't consider myself to be too horribly different from where I started. Although I try to be a nicer, more respectful, more compassionate person. I think more about other people now than I used to. Perhaps, we're not the best people to judge where we are on the path. And it may seem impossible or miraculous, but I know these processes work, and they will work for anyone who sincerely seeks the Tao. I know they will. I do know enough to know that those processes have wrought significant changes in me, in the way that I think and in the way that I do things. And they will do that for others as well. Thank you all awful much. Sorry about the restart this morning. Sometimes the technology gets us all. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.
Hey, thank you, Bill. So Bill, thank you for the confirmation. Bill has fallen over and crashed to the ground. No. So Bill, thank you for the confirmation at the beginning of your talk. So I want to share a little bit with the group, because there's also an email message that I wrote to you in addition to that journal entry that I sent to you. I know Bill will be a little bit too modest to share that, but my observation of Bill is that every Sunday when he begins his presentation, his heart is so filled with joy and also a sense of awe. Like after all these years, he's still awestruck at the beginning of his meeting. Like, wow, I am actually connecting with all these people from all over the world. How cool is that? You know, that's sort of the little boy in Bill's heart that is still really just enjoying himself, you know, with total joy. So, in a very real way, and also Bill only has to, you know, turn around, walk a short distance to go to this beautiful shrine that he has set up at his house. And he's looking at that shrine, and he's also thinking to himself that, you know, years ago, like 10, 20 years ago, when he was, prior to him getting into all of this and becoming an owner of a shrine, once upon a time, he would have thought that that would be very unlikely or very improbable. And yet here it is. The shrine in his house is something that's real, that he can reach out and touch. It has become part of his reality. So with those observations, that's the reason why, you know, I feel like he's one of the people that I know who started out having this vision about the future, and then as he walked the path, that vision became reality. Now, of course, I don't want to just say that with and putting words in his mouth, so that's the reason why I sent an email message out to him. I also observed similar things in different aspects of life. I observed similar process going on for Carmen, so I sent a similar message to her as well. Again, don't want to put words in her mouth, but wanted to ask her what she thought and if she would confirm my observation. So, so the truth is, I brought this up with Bibi briefly. The truth is that there's a whole bunch of people. There's more than, I think there's around 10 people that I can name off the top of my head that have been on this process for several years now. And for them, the success rate is 100%. So I know that if I were to tell people that, hey, what if, you know, how would you like to learn a way to make sure that your deepest dreams, your fondest wishes all become reality? Everyone will be like, you know, yes, yes, tell me the secrets, tell me now. Of course, when I actually explain it, they will all be kind of disappointed. Oh, is that all? Okay, well, you know, so what I have to share is not glamorous, but it does work. So the people that have stuck with it, like Bill has, like Carmen has, for years at a time, they've obtained the results that they were looking for. Now, it is important for me to also point out that as they lived their lives, they were not aiming themselves at these goals in an obsessive way. They knew what they wanted to do, they knew what they wanted to see happen in their lives, but their focus was on themselves. Their focus was within the heart. So that's the magic ingredient that makes it work. Later on in this presentation, in chapter 19, I'll get to the part where it talks about reducing desires and reducing selfishness, and that really segues very well into this whole idea of turning wish into reality. Because on the face of it, it seems as if you have a wish about the world and about what's going to happen in the future, that you automatically have this desire. And isn't the Tao Te Ching calling us to reduce that? So I want to bring it all together and provide a framework for everyone that I think will make perfect sense. What I do know is that it really, really does work. If you guys were listening to this and you decide that you want to adapt it for yourself and you are able to stick with it, then I can guarantee that your wishes will also become reality. Another point before we take a quick break is that Bill talked about Lao Tzu, you know, this ancient sage, and it is important for me to chime in on that and say that when we say Lao Tzu, we're not referring to a deity that we worship. It's kind of the other way. We look at the Tao Te Ching, we look at the ancient text, we know that someone wrote it. We know that it did not appear out of thin air. Okay, so it was written by one person or perhaps multiple individuals contributed. So there's debates in academia about whether or not Lao Tzu was a single person, if he existed as a single person, or as a composite, or a combination of multiple individuals. And I would say, fine, either way, you guys carry on with your debates. That's not my focus, because the focus was never about the person, who he was. Maybe to someone who has a deity worship of Lao Tzu would find that to be a very critical question. But for us, I hope, for all of us, the focus is on the wisdom and not on the person or persons, plural. It is sort of exactly like what Chris and I were chatting about this morning, where we were, and I'll paraphrase it, we were discussing how, as we explore spirituality, a lot of times we come across teachers, gurus, who will set themselves up as a single point of access, like the real deal, the true wisdom. I got it. It's sold in my store only. Accept no imitation, accept no substitutes. You come here and buy my stuff. Setting up sort of a spiritual monopoly that way. So I think for both Chris and myself, again, we would have to say the same thing. It isn't the person. It's really the wisdom. So